Greetings and welcome to Neighborhood Beat. Today's show looks at fair housing and our rights against discrimination. Our guest today is Ms. Glendora Hughes, Esquire, who is General Counsel with the Maryland Commission on Human Relations. Glendora, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's been a while since you've been on, and there's so many things going on in fair housing and civil rights that I'm glad you could join us today. First of all, for those of our viewers who are unfamiliar and didn't see the show about a couple years now since you've been on, could you tell us a little bit about the Maryland Commission on Human Relations?
Sure. The Maryland Commission on Human Relations is the state agency that enforces the state anti-discrimination law. We cover employment, fair housing, public accommodation, and we also investigate and litigate cases dealing with commercial non-discrimination. Your job as General Counsel is to make sure that the law is enforced. Yes, I head a unit, the litigation unit for the Commission. We're an independent agency. We're not staffed by the Attorney General's office because we have the power and authority to file complaints and litigate against the state if there's any discrimination in state agencies. So we're independent, and I head up that office, the General Counsel's office, that carries out that work. How long have you been with the Commission? A long time. I'm not telling.
And what's been what was your background?
I went to the University of Maryland, College Park, graduated with the Urban Studies degree. Then I went to University of Maryland Law School, and when I graduated, I clerked for a judge for a year, and then I started at the Commission as a staff attorney, and worked my way up to General Counsel.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in those years, those innumerable years, just a few years, of course, things have changed and not changed in the course of the cases that have come up.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that sometimes things change and then they remain the same. I remember some of my early cases dealing with sexual harassment, and you would think by now things have gotten better and it's not such a big issue. Unfortunately, I do a great deal of training and presentations on sexual harassment because it's still a very big problem in the employment situation.
Have the illegal acts changed at all?
No.
For example, in sexual harassment?
No, I mean, you still have an environment.
Sexual harassment is sexual harassment.
You still have the environment where you have persons who come into an employment situation bringing behaviors that are inappropriate for work. It may be something they're used to doing in their social settings. It may be their attitude toward women. It may be that it's a power situation where I can do it and think I can get away with it. And so you have various acts that take place. Some of them are very egregious. Some of them reach the level of sexual assault. And the attitude is that what is the problem? And we have a controversy going on now about the reporter who went into the New York Jets locker room and some of the behavior that she suffered from cat calls and comments, which is typical behavior that used to happen on construction sites when a woman walked by.
In the 50s, right?
Right,
yeah.
And it's still happening.
Yeah. Fine. So many things have changed and so many things have not changed.
Yeah.
I guess sexual harassment is sexual harassment.
Yes.
What is the law? Let's just, as long as we're here, what is the law about sexual harassment?
Well, sexual harassment, there are two things that the courts look at and try to decipher. One is that a person should be able to come to work and have a workplace free of discrimination, free of hostility or intimidation. So there are prohibited acts that are of a sexual nature that would create a hostile environment, or if you have a person of authority, a supervisor, a manager, who uses their position to get someone or to intimidate someone into having a relationship with them, or abusing them, or freely grabbing on them, and if they don't cooperate, using their position to threaten them with termination or denying them a promotion if they don't follow through with what the supervisor wants.
Yeah.
So you have what they call quid pro quo harassment, where it is, if you do something for me, I'll do something for you. If you don't, well, then you'll suffer the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a very elementary, basic definition of what sexual harassment law is.
Yeah. I guess the devil's in the details about what constitutes a hostile environment, too.
Well, there are certain criteria you have to follow when we investigate a complaint and when we have to prove a complaint. It has to impact the person's ability to do their job. It has to be actions of a sexual nature that is conducted either by coworkers or the supervisor who may know or should have known that this behavior is taking place. A lot of times, managers or the owner may find out that there is a hostile environment when a person's being evaluated, and they say, I'm being harassed, which is why my work production is going down. And that's the thing. It impacts production in the employment situation of the employer when you have your staff being harassed. And not just women are harassed, men are harassed as well.
Yeah. If somebody has a question about what is sexual harassment or what is the law about this, who should they contact?
They can contact the Maryland Commission on Human Relations. Our number is 410-767-8600. And you can go online and see the commission online, where we have a lot of information about various laws and our brochures. And that's at mchr.maryland.gov.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. And you also have an 800 number, too. 800-637-6247?
I believe that's what it is. I'm not
sure
because I never call it. But the 767-8600 number will get you to someone at the intake who will then assist in determining whether we have jurisdiction, whether there's a complaint, and help take the complaint. And you can file online, you can fax it in. There are numerous ways to file a complaint with the commission.
Great, thanks. Mm-hmm. But the important thing for folks to remember is that if you have a question, call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's free. Mm-hmm. The information's free, and your confidentiality will be protected.
It's important for people to educate themselves about what is happening to them. Sometimes it is something we do not have jurisdiction over, and we can't help, but we don't just drop the individual there. We will try to connect them with the appropriate agency or the appropriate body that can provide them some assistance.
Right. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about fair housing. Mm-hmm. First of all, what is fair housing?
Well, fair housing is state and federal law, and I think some counties have prohibitions against fair housing in their ordinances that look at making it discriminatory to discriminate in persons' attempts to purchase homes, to rent homes, the terms and conditions of them living in their homes, if you're disabled, barriers to them having access to their home or access within their homes, and the steering, blockbusting, those kinds of things that we heard about back in the 60s and 70s.
And they're still around,
Well,
too.
They're still around. They're a lot more sophisticated, but it still exists.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those things that if you have a question, you should call the commission.
Absolutely. We do have information, like I said, brochures and information on our website as well to allow someone to educate themselves on about fair housing. And you can go to HUD's website and get additional information too.
Right, thanks. evolution of civil rights laws in the state of Maryland has been a curious one. But Maryland, how would you say Maryland ranks nationally in terms of protections and remedies?
Well, I think Maryland ranks pretty high. I mean, Maryland's had some form of a Human Relations Commission since 1927. It was one of the first in the country to create such an agency. Over the years, we've added numerous protected classes. The last two that were added was genetic information and sexual orientation. During the session, there are other attempts to add other protected classes. There are counties that have ordinances that have more protected classes than the state or the feds, but it is a universal and collective attempt to address discrimination in the state.
Right. Sexual orientation and genetic information. Maybe since you mentioned that, we should clarify that a little for folks. By genetic information discrimination, what might that involve?
Well, that may involve a prohibition against an employer utilizing information by physical or medical information that they may receive because of an employment situation, and utilizing it to screen people out. All of us have genetic markers. We're predisposed of having some type of disease that runs in our family.
Yep.
And that brought about the issue is that some employers were using that predisposition to eliminate people from certain jobs or not hiring them at all. Or
because of fear of the health care costs?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And if that's the case, most of us wouldn't be working.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so it's a prohibition from using that information or making someone be tested for that information, or if you have the information, using it without the person's consent. It prohibits doing that. As usual, the states are ahead of the feds. The federal government just passed their law I believe last year or so, and we've had it since 2007.
And sexual orientation?
Well, it's a prohibition of discriminating against someone based on their orientation, whether it's homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual.
All right. Fair housing. What protected classes are there in the state's fair housing law?
Well, there's race, there's religion, there's gender, there's marital status, color, national origin, disability, and familiar status, which is something that exists in housing but doesn't exist in employment.
Yeah, and I know from of course, we work together in a number of things and over a number of years, that's a matter of the more things change, the more they stay the same too. There are still there's still discrimination on almost all of those.
Absolutely.
If not all of those.
Right. It still exists. In terms of how many complaints we get, that varies from time to time. In housing, this past fiscal year, disability was higher than race, and race has usually been the higher number of complaints we receive. But this past fiscal year, we got more complaints about from persons with disabilities about discrimination in housing.
What kind of issues are going on?
Well, there are issues dealing with parking, needing to have parking closer to their units because of their disability, barriers to access an accessible route from the parking lot to their unit.
So in other words, somebody has a condominium unit and they have a parking space, but the parking space is up a great hill, and then there's curbs and that kind of thing?
Or you have the person provided with handicap parking, but then there's no curb cut to get out of the parking lot.